everyone, this is Donna Knapp from ITSM Academy. I'd like to welcome you to this month's webinar. We're here this month to talk about ITSM roles in an Agile and DevOps world. I know I was looking forward to hearing from Jayne Groll, CEO of the DevOps Institute today. Unfortunately, Jayne is feeling a little bit under the weather, and so I'm going to pinch hit for her. I'm going to do the presentation, but Jayne is going to join us towards the end, and we're going to team up to answer your questions. So I'm really looking forward to that. So let's go ahead and get started. Here at ITSM Academy, we're very proud to partner up with DevOps Institute. DevOps Institute is a continuous learning community. They're putting out great training courses that are evolving by using a collective body of knowledge, and they're really geared to enterprises like yours. We're going to talk today about the role of IT service management and how it's changing within organizations, and part of what's driving that change is the digital transformation. Whether we're talking about our businesses or our homes or our cars, software is driving the world today. And so every company really has to be thinking today about how to capitalize on digital technology and provide services, digital services, that are meeting the needs of their organization. And it's particularly important because no matter how large of an organization you are, there may be a little tiny startup company out there with a really innovative idea that's going to become your biggest competitor as soon as they launch that product. So we have to be responsive to change. We have to understand that trends like the moving to cloud technologies have really removed the physical barriers that used to slow us down as organizations. And so we've got to move more quickly. And we also have to understand, and a lot of you are probably familiar with Moore's Law, that that rate of improvement is going to increase exponentially over time. So even though we feel, I know I personally over like the last 5 years have said, wow, more about cool things that have coming, cool new technology. I've said, well, more in the last 5 years than I've said in maybe 30 years in the IT industry, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So we all need to speed up. So what makes DevOps so unique? Why this introduction of DevOps practices? Why has that prompted so much thought to how we approach IT service management? It's really important to understand that DevOps doesn't stand alone. So through the years, we've been using Scrum to improve Agile software development. We've been using Lean to streamline our processes. We've been using frameworks like ITIL in order to introduce good, solid IT service management processes. But unfortunately, within a lot of organizations, all of these improvements that we've been making in different parts of our organization haven't happened across the entire IT value stream. So while we've seen these little benefits here and there, we've not seen the overall improvement that we need to be making in order to be competitive. So what we have to do is rethink how we approach process improvement and how we approach using technology, and more specifically, how we automate tasks so that we can free up human beings in order to focus on innovation and focus on actually leveraging that digital technology. So we have to take a step back. We have to look across the entire end-to-end IT value stream, and we have to take a systems thinking approach or a holistic approach. And what systems thinking says is, let's understand that if you change one aspect of your environment, you have to think about the impact on the other aspects of our environment. Sometimes when we think about DevOps, we think about only the technology, only the automation aspects of things. But you have to understand that if you don't have good, solid processes in place, in other words, if you're doing things wrong, with technology, you'll do them wrong faster. And we absolutely have to be thinking about the cultural aspects of this transformation on the people within our organization. So we have to take that systems thinking or holistic approach. But before we start changing anything, let's ask a question. Is IT service management still even relevant in organizations today? You know, you'll see articles out there that will say idle is dead, or, you know, let's stop doing IT service management or idle and let's start doing DevOps. And there's a couple of myths that surround that whole conversation. The first myth is that idle was built for waterfall, and so it's not really appropriate to an agile or DevOps environment. And there's a little bit of truth to that. Idle was first introduced in the 1980s. Waterfall as a project management approach was very prevalent at that time. The latest idle refresh was in 2011, and still waterfall was very, you know, relevant and in our organizations. But throughout the idle guidance, there's an emphasis on adapting the processes in order to meet the needs of the organization, in order to meet your organization's circumstances or your goals, your business's requirements. So that's still the case. We've got to adapt our IT service management processes in order to make them more agile and support this faster flow of work. A second myth that we hear quite a bit is that IT service management is just plain incompatible with DevOps, that it focuses too much on control or it focuses too much on upfront planning. But the reality is, within a DevOps environment, you are performing IT service management processes. Things are changing and we need to manage those changes. Things are breaking and we need to fix those incidents, or we need to determine what the root cause of those incidents was. So idle is very relevant, just as relevant today as it has been in the past. It really does continue to be worldwide the best reflection of practices that evolved over time in order to enable IT service management excellence. And that's what really DevOps requires. It requires this underlying foundation of operational excellence. And idle absolutely can help you get there. You have to, again, adapt your processes in order to support DevOps, but it's still very, very relevant today. One reason why IT service management continues to be relevant is because even though with DevOps we think about software, we think about introducing changes to applications, what our customers are thinking about is the services that we provide. So I, as a customer of a bank, don't think to myself, I want to go in and interface with their checking application. I think to myself, I want to go online, I want to use their online banking services in order to transfer money from my checking account to my savings account, or I want to simply check my checking balance. I want to see if that transaction cleared my account. We think about, or we as customers and our customers think about services. Am I getting value from this company? Is this company enabling me to do the things that I want to do? Are they facilitating the outcomes that I want to achieve? And as long as customers think about services, those services have to be managed. And that's what service management is all about. It's about those specialized capabilities that we put in place within our organization to make sure that we understand what our customers' requirements are relative to services, that we're delivering services that meet our customers' needs, and perhaps that as our customers' needs change, we're evolving those services or obsoleting our services and introducing new services in order to continue to be competitive.
Having said all that, IT service management has to become more agile. And how do we do that? Here's where Agile service management comes into play. So what Agile service management does is adapt Agile practices, and perhaps more specifically, Scrum practices, in essence, taking an iterative and incremental approach to ITSM process design and improvement in the same way that software developers are using Agile and Scrum practices to develop software. We also look at implementing service management in smaller increments. So whereas historically, when we were developing a process, we would think about all of the activities within that process and all the possible conditions that might occur within the boundaries of that process, and we'd produce this big, massive process definition document that kind of crossed every T and dotted every I and thought about every condition that might ever possibly occur. Today, we're really looking at, can we take an incremental approach? Can we look at initially just the policies and then individual activities? And also, really importantly, can we make sure that as we're designing and improving those processes, we reflect Agile values throughout our design and improvement activities? So what does that mean? What does reflecting Agile values mean? If you're not familiar with the Agile Manifesto, you can see it on your screen. I know the first time I ever saw the Agile Manifesto, I had a moment, because I'm a process design geek from way back. And I had a moment when I saw this, you know, we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And what I learned over time is that I had misinterpreted what the Agile Manifesto was all about. The Agile Manifesto doesn't say that those things on the right-hand side aren't important. It's not saying processes and tools aren't important or documentation isn't important. What it's saying is that we want to put in place just enough of those things on the right so that we can be successful in those areas reflected on the left. So in the case of processes, for example, we don't want to have such rigorous processes or such complex and perhaps overly bureaucratic processes in place in our organization that we really lose sight of what's important to our customers, that we have ineffective working relationships with the different teams within our organization. So let's focus first on enabling people to work together, for example, versus having these really rigorous and controlling processes. Documentation is important, but let's have just enough documentation. Let's maybe narrow down the amount of documentation that we have to produce and focus on, in the case of the Agile Manifesto, working software, but we can also say in the case of working and efficient and effective processes. Let's collaborate with our customers and just have a good, positive working relationship with them, instead of entering into every conversation as if it were a contract negotiation where there needs to be a winner and there needs to be a loser. And last but not least, let's be responsive to change. We know, and Jayne's point about, you know, the rate of change, we know in this day and age that it seems like overnight, right? We see these dramatic changes in terms of the technology that's available, how that technology is being leveraged. So it's really important to understand that any company today, and we're all software companies today, as Jayne said, has to be responsive to change and has to know that their competition might be some little small startup company out there, and they have to be prepared to change and change on a dime. Now, that doesn't mean that planning isn't important, but you know, historically, we had these big complex plans, these long-term plans, and we felt often compelled to march down that plan, even when we got a fleeting sense that that plan might not be sending us in the same direction. So again, just enough planning to enable us to move forward, but most importantly, we need to be responsive to change. So how do we do that? How do we have just enough? You might be familiar with the concept of minimum viable product, which in the context of software development is the most pared down version of a software product that we can deliver to early adopters to get feedback. We can use that same philosophy with our processes. So let's look at paring our processes down, or if you're getting ready to implement a new process, make sure that any process that you introduce is scaled down, that it's delivering just enough value to achieve the outcomes of that process. And then we can always use feedback in order to improve the process or perhaps add additional controls along the way. So again, as opposed to that kind of historical perspective of crossing every T and dotting every I and, you know, trying to make sure your processes cover every possible situation that might occur, let's come up with the most pared down version and go from there. So what are the roles that we have to have in place to do that? There are a number of Agile service management roles, and these Agile service management roles really require that, and I think in the work world today, we really need to have multiple dimensions, and we all need to be very much lifelong learners. So when we look at these new roles that are emerging, and you might be familiar with these concepts of I-shaped people and T-shaped people, and really it's this kind of evolution from having people who are generalists, who have a very good broad base of skills, which is excellent, but moving into that notion that even, you know, on top of that broad base of skills, you have an area of specialization, that you're an expert in some particular area. You're viewed as a subject matter expert. And in the case of pie-shaped people, maybe you have two areas of expertise. And one of the things that makes pie-shaped people really unique is that a lot of times those specialty areas are things that historically people didn't have. So an example might be you have a skill set that's very left brain oriented, right? You're very analytical, you're very data driven, but you also have an expertise where you're very right brain driven. You're kind of creative, and you can, you know, handle marketing related activities and kind of see bigger picture activities. So you have these two unique specialties, but they're very much complementary in terms of enabling you to be a little bit more of a rounded person. And a cone-shaped person is really somebody who, and I kind of count myself in this category, that it's somebody who's really a lifelong learner, somebody who's very interested in always learning about different frameworks or different technologies, different approaches to doing things, and very often, and perhaps most importantly in today's work world, in different business areas. So, you know, maybe you not only have expertise in working in a government agency, you have expertise working in a startup, you have expertise working in a, you know, high technology, high performance technology organization. So you have this, you know, you have this specialist knowledge, but you also, you know, on top of that have this broad based knowledge that spans different areas of expertise. So when we talk about some of the new emerging roles for IT service management, they include the Agile Service Manager. So an Agile Service Manager, and if you look at what a service manager is, it's someone who understands how to deliver services and how to ensure the processes that you have in place within your organization are delivering value. When we add in that Agile component there, it says that I'm a little bit of a pie-shaped person, right? I not only understand Agile practices like Scrum, perhaps I understand areas like DevOps. I also very much understand IT service management and how they need to be integrated. I understand the importance of having a minimum viable or just enough process, and optimally, I understand how to automate those processes within our organization. So when we look at this role of Agile Service Manager, it's really an operational counterpart to in what is in development called a Scrum Master. The Scrum Master's role is to keep the software developers, to help the software developers understand Agile practices and specifically Scrum practices, and make sure that they're taking this iterative and incremental approach. And Agile Service Manager applies those same concepts to IT service management, process design and improvement. They help process improvement teams work more effectively, and they work really closely with Agile process owners to make sure that their processes reflect those Agile values. So the Agile process owner is the counterpart to what's called a product owner in Scrum. And it's really the process owner, the Agile process owner's job to maintain the process backlog. And the process backlog is really a reflection of all of the requirements, all of the changes, all of the improvements that we need to make in order to ensure this process is efficient and effective. And really, most importantly, they need to make sure that those processes have in place just enough control to achieve their objectives. I think this is a very exciting time to be a process owner in an organization, because you have a tremendous opportunity to really help the organization improve its flow, not only relative to your particular process, but by working with other process owners to improve flow across the entire IT value stream, by understanding DevOps practices, by understanding Agile practices, and marrying those to the fundamental goals of IT service management. Again, IT service management isn't going away. We still need to deliver services. We need our processes to achieve the same outcomes. We just have to figure out how to do it in a more effective way. And we also have to understand that one size never fits all. So things like process models, understanding that depending on considerations like risk and potential impact, we can have different procedural aspects of our processes, so that sometimes we can move through a process very, very quickly, and sometimes we need to have that more complex and comprehensive process to make sure that we're covering all of our risks. And always understanding that processes are never done. I was a change manager at one point in my career, so this is a role that's very near and dear to my heart. But I have to say that when I really started to understand what DevOps was all about, I really came to understand how critical it is today for change managers to really look at their processes and making sure that change management moves away from its reputation, which is sometimes the no process, and making sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do. And that is managing risk, but not overly taking an overly risk-averse approach. And again, that might be by looking at, are there things that we can pre-approve? Do we actually need to have everything going in front of a committee in order to get approval, or can there be some more localized approvals? Rethink the authorization models, or rethink the authorization hierarchies, and also really again look at creating and maintaining change models. As we see practices like DevOps practices introduced, we need to understand that these practices are designed to automatically, through automating testing practices, automating building practices, they're designed to mitigate risks. And so we need to let those practices do their thing, but we can't at the same time not have changes being recorded and information about changes being communicated. We just again have to figure out a different way of doing things. So the Agile change manager's role is to make sure that we have just enough process in order to meet the needs. One of the things we might look at, for example, is the notion of standard changes. And standard changes, are, as defined by ITIL, pre-approved and proceduralized. And we see very much with DevOps where organizations are moving away from this idea of you having to request a change. Historically we call that a request for change. Think about it, that change got approved a while back when it was introduced into the product backlog, when it got pulled into development. There have been multiple approvals that have occurred up until that point. So now let's look at recording the change and capturing the change so that we have the information we need. We know what changed, we know when it changed, we know who changed it, so that if we need that in the production environment, we've got that information, but we're not slowing down the flow of work. When we look at DevOps practices, release management is really coming into its own. And so the role of Agile release manager is very important. Historically, release management was viewed as the planning process and the process that handled the deployment of changes, and typically when we talked about the deployment of changes, we were talking about the manual deployment of changes. as we introduce these Agile and DevOps practices, and inherent in that is this notion of we're making smaller changes, we're making more frequent releases. This process is one of the processes that's been very, very heavily automated, but that doesn't mean we've lost the fundamental need for this process. We still need to make sure that when we're making releases, we're planning those releases at an appropriate time for the business. Every business has different patterns of business activity, times where it just doesn't make sense to make changes. We need to focus on letting the business focus on the business. So historically, retail organizations don't make major changes during the holiday season, or insurance companies don't make major changes in the summertime because people are moving and they're changing their insurance policies. But we can start to rethink when we make releases, and that's part of what an Agile release manager needs to do. Really get clear on what the business requirements are, what the technological practices are that we have in place in our organization that are enabling us to speed up how quickly we make releases, and then working closely with a change manager to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to deploy changes in a way that meets the needs of the organization. Configuration management historically has really been about capturing information about the technology that we have in place. We talk in ITIL about configuration management systems and CMDBs, but we have to really look at, especially in the context of DevOps, and understand that there have been a whole lot of changes that have gone on. First of all, we're moving a lot of our services to the cloud. We're really looking at infrastructure as a service, and so we really have to rethink how are we going to capture information about these virtual assets that we have in place in our organization. It's very common to see organizations where they're standing up test environments in a cloud environment, doing some testing and then shutting that environment down. How do we track that? How do we manage that? Hopefully it makes sense to everyone that the answer isn't gonna be that we do that manually. So we have to look at the technology that's available today, the configurations management systems that are available that enable us to standardize our configurations, to make sure that we have an environment so that when developers make changes or deploy changes, they know what that environment's going to look like. They can feel confident that the environment is going to be consistent with the changes that they're making. And in terms of capturing the information about those environments, we have to do it automatically. We can't rely on human beings to be updating CI records and maintaining that information. Increasingly, we're seeing where organizations, as part of their deployment pipeline, their DevOps pipeline, they're capturing that configuration information, they're updating that configuration management system and that configuration management database automatically. Human beings aren't having to handle that. So an Agile configuration manager has to really be thinking about, okay, what are all these new CI types that we have to be thinking about? What are these new technologies that are available that will help us get the information that we need in order to support other processes, but do so in an automatic way? And certainly incident and problem management continue to be critical. You know, as long as there is technology, that technology will get changed. And you know, we've all heard through the years that very often, you know, incidents are caused by change. So we have to make sure that we're getting involved, first of all, earlier in the life cycle, to make sure that much earlier on, as new software products are being developed, we're capturing incident-related data. We're starting to investigate the root cause of problems. If you have some automated tests, for example, that are chronically failing, why is that? Let's use our problem management practices to figure out what the root cause is and improve that development process. So I think where historically incident problem management were processes we thought only came into play once we got into the production environment, the reality is that we've got to be involved much earlier in the life cycle. And we also have to be looking at how we can leverage technology. So can we make sure that the bug tracking systems that are used by the development organization, and the incident management systems that are used on the production side of the house are, if nothing else, integrated, or perhaps even we move to a common tool so that we create that very, very fast feedback loop so that any and all information about incidents and problems are being captured, they're being passed very, very quickly back to development, or knowledge about how to handle those incidents and problems is being passed very, very quickly forward to the service desk and to the folks in the production side of the house. So we talked about some common IT service management processes, but I want you to look at this list. And when we think about DevOps, again, there are these kind of myths that, IT service management isn't relevant anymore. These processes are, obsolete. They're an old-fashioned way of doing things. And hopefully it makes sense to everybody that that's not the case at all. And that, in fact, all of these processes that are shown here are still relevant. But just like the processes we talked about, these processes have to be adapted. Service levels aren't going away. We still have to deliver to the expectations of our customers in terms of the service levels we provide. But how do we integrate those service levels into the development environment? Things like availability, capacity, continuity, security. It's always been the case that we needed to be thinking about those things earlier in the life cycle. And supplier management certainly is critical. As we move more and more things to the cloud, we can't think that it's the supplier's responsibility to handle incidents or problems, because at the end of the day, it's your business that's on the line when things go wrong.
Donna?
Yes.
Hey, it's Karen. Todd and Javier are saying that your battery is about to die.
Okay.
Okay. They said you might want to plug in. And thank you for sharing that with us.
I'm going to put my laptop in my docking station, so that might change my view a little bit, and I apologize if it does.
Okay.
Hopefully it didn't.
I'll let you know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I've been talking a little bit about DevOps, and a set of practices that we're also seeing emerge is relate to site reliability engineering. It's really interesting to me. DevOps has been around for about 10 years now, probably more by now. Site reliability is the same. It's not a new concept, but it's really starting to emerge because increasingly, and part of this has to do with moving services to the cloud and and when you move things to the cloud, right, it kind of removes those physical barriers that have historically slowed things down. So as we move things to the cloud and we're able to move more quickly and we're able to provide, and the expectation is that we're providing higher performance systems, it's even more critical that in the production environment, we're really looking at those processes that make up the reliability of our services. So things like availability, things like capacity, things like handling disasters and what we're going to do in the event of an emergency. So these IT service management processes like event and service level management, change, incident problem, and what ITIL calls the warranty processes, capacity, availability, security, continuity, they're really critical processes. And what site reliability is looking at is, much like DevOps, how can we automate these activities? How can we make sure that we're thinking about these activities much, much earlier during the software engineering process? So we have software engineers who are really designing these operational functions into our systems and making sure that they're being addressed early on. They're not something that gets bolted on once we get our new products into the production environment. So again, it's really interesting. These movements were introduced somewhat independently, but we're seeing them converge now because organizations have really come to understand that if we're going to speed up the development lifecycle through, agile practices like Scrum, we've got to, speed up the operational practices. And more importantly, in order to manage the risks associated with moving quickly, we have to look at proactively putting in processes that ensure the quality of the services that we're providing and that the appropriate level of service is being delivered. Who cares if you can move quickly and you're slam dunking poor quality software into the production environment? So what these new ways of thinking, these new ways of working, these new ways of approaching IT all have in common is that they require us to all in this day and age understand the entire IT value stream. While we still see that there's developers who are focusing on producing new software products, as we move to this notion of infrastructure as code, and as we move to automated configuration management, we have the ops side of the house working right along with those agile software developers to make sure that the environments are available when they're needed, so that we can move very quickly with that iterative and incremental approach to agile software development. We can make sure that we're moving fast, we're providing for experimentation, and that we also have the continuous delivery and the continuous deployment practices in place. And here's where you really see the DevOps practices emerging that enable us to automatically transition that new code through our build and testing processes into the production environment. And very frequently, we're doing that automatically. So a developer submits code, we integrate, we do an automated build, we automatically run that code through a series of tests. And in some organizations, we actually automatically deploy that code into the production environment. And here's really where SRE comes into play, of making sure that when we're introducing that new code, we're not impacting the business, we're not impacting the performance of other services that might interact with that service. But again, understand that site reliability engineering doesn't start in the production environment. Our site reliability engineers had to be involved early on during the development of that software. We're actively involved in writing the tests that were performed during the continuous delivery and continuous delivery pipeline, and then are really monitoring in the production environment to make sure that everything that we did was successful and didn't cause any impact to the organization. So I love this slide because it really brings together these trends of DevOps and Agile and site reliability engineering, and we see the overlay there of IT service management. IT service management is still very relevant from a service strategy standpoint. We have to understand the business demand for services. We have to understand and make sure that we're designing those services in a way that they're going to be maintainable and that they're going to meet our business needs. And we have to make sure that from a change and release and configuration management environment, from a change and release standpoint, we're optimally, automatically transitioning those services into our production environment and perhaps pulling them out of our production environment if something goes wrong. So how do we get there? We have to think like an agile startup. We really, even in an enterprise environment, we all in this day and age need to shift the way we need to think. We all need to become a little more pie-shaped and have not only an expertise in our particular area, whether it be ops or security or QA, but also understand these agile practices and really have a broader understanding of the entire IT value stream. Historically in IT, we've had this very siloed approach to doing things, and we understand that that's really slowed us down. So we have to find ways to remove the waste, to make sure that we're creating models for handling our different IT service management processes, and having those models result in improved flow across the IT value stream. One of the things we really have to look at is having a common vocabulary or a common taxonomy. It's one of the things that's kind of gotten us into trouble along the way. I know when I first started learning about DevOps, I had to, I constantly challenged the people that were kind of schooling me on these DevOps practices on the use of terms like release and deploy, because historically in Dev and in Ops, we use those terms differently. Sometimes we use them as nouns, sometimes we use them as verbs. So the notion of crowdsourcing that vocabulary is, and IDLE says this, adopt and adapt. You don't have to use the textbook definition of something, but what you do have to have is a common term and a common definition that everybody understands wherever you are in the organization. So here's where the process owners come into play. I mentioned it's a great time to be a process owner. If you don't have process owners for all of your processes in place, that's a great place to start. And really, it's now up to the process owners to take that leadership role to make sure that they're understanding what's going on with Agile and DevOps, creating a process backlog so that they can capture requirements and understand what changes they need to make to their processes. And those changes might include looking at the change authorization hierarchies, or looking at how we can introduce automation, taking that Agile service management approach, that iterative incremental approach to improving our processes. And historically, the word experimentation hasn't come into play when it comes to process improvement. But if you look at Plan, Do, Check, Act, if you look at the Lean Improvement Akata, they all talk about, let's set a goal, let's make a change, then let's analyze whether or not we achieve the objectives, and if not, let's adjust accordingly. That's experimentation in its absolute purest form. So it's an exciting time. There's a lot of need for process improvement in organizations today. One of the biggest messages, hopefully, you're taking away from this conversation is it's so critical that our processes today have just enough control. We need to control without being controlling. I like to say we need to make it easy for people to do the right thing and achieve the desired outcomes from our processes, and focus on those desired outcomes as opposed to focusing on just the process itself.
If this webinar has piqued your interest and you're wondering where you can learn more about the IT service management roles that we talked about in this webinar, ITSM Academy actually offers 2 certification courses: Certified Agile Service Manager, Certified Agile Process Owners. These 2 role-based qualifications are actually the counterpart to the Scrum Master and Product Owner roles, and very much like those roles are really put in place within organizations to, in the case of a Certified Agile Service Manager, help the organization understand Agile Service Management, help them understand how to use those practices. And in the case of a process owner, how do we maximize the value of our processes? So the process owner owns the product backlog, makes sure that the process improvement team is working on the most important components of that process backlog at any given time. So these certifications really enable you to better understand these roles and how to utilize Agile service management practices within your organization. We're also really excited to offer, in conjunction with the DevOps Institute, DevOps Foundation. It's an incredibly popular course, but we're also starting to launch the DevOps Practitioner Series. We've recently introduced DevOps Test Engineering. You may have heard the quote that everyone's a tester in a DevOps organization, and DevOps Test Engineering helps us all to understand what that test engineering role is all about. DevOps Leader is coming shortly, and it's really about how to lead a DevOps transformation. Later in the fall, we'll be launching continuous delivery architecture. and also DevSecOps engineering. So we hope that you'll utilize ITSM Academy, whether it's for your ITIL training needs, your Agile Service Management needs, your DevOps needs. Please reach out and let us know how we can help. So let's get on to the fun part, and let's do a little bit of Q&A.